Tomorrow is Juneteenth in Texas. Some of you may wonder, what exactly is that? Well, it commemorates June 19th, 1865, when Union Army General Gordon Granger stood on the balcony of the Ashton Villa in Galveston and said, in part, in accordance with a proclamation, all slaves are free. He was referring to President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation that was issued in January of 1863. So why did it take so long for word to reach slaves in Texas? Texas, remember, was part of the Confederacy, and the war didn't end until April of 1865. So until the Union Army arrived in Galveston 2 months later, slaves there weren't aware of the proclamation. And until the war was over, the proclamation was meaningless. In 1866, former Texas slaves began celebrating Juneteenth, also known as Freedom Day, a celebration that continues to this very day.
Well, hello, everyone. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Regina Stanback Stroud. I'm the Chancellor at Peralta Community College District, a very important cultural resource in our East Bay community. I'd like to welcome you to the salon in celebration of the so-called emancipation of Black people in these United States. We have a panel of talented and accomplished individuals who will do their best to exact their wisdom and knowledge upon us. You know, Malcolm Gladwell's breakthrough debut in trying to define the science behind viral trends, primarily for the benefit of marketing and business, in that breakthrough, he introduced a concept called the tipping point. And that tipping point he described as the magic moment when an idea or social behavior crosses a threshold, tips, and spreads like wildfire. It's possible that this nation and maybe the world has come upon the tipping point when we all watched over 9 agonizing minutes Mr. George Floyd being murdered under the color of authority and the sanction of law. And there's so many, the countless other thousands of Black people that have had similar fates. We may have come to the tipping point. We didn't come to it necessarily from slavery, a brutal 400 years for Black people, or massacres, or lynchings, or mass incarceration, or any of the other disparities that you can extract from society. We didn't come from it from the unrelenting brutality and violence that's been exacted upon Black people. But perhaps we're at that point now, because this nation has enjoyed the ability to hold 2 diametrically opposing concepts together. For an example, it has the ability to insist on life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness while holding slavery as a God-given necessary right, or insisting on give me liberty or give me death while holding slavery as a God-given necessary right, or founding a nation and including in an important document, the Constitution, the notion that all men are created equally while holding slavery as a necessary and God-given right. They've been able to celebrate the independence and the freedom of the people on the 4th of July while holding slavery as a God-given and necessary right. Well, this day is about that. This discussion is about that. Pcyeta Stroud is going to lead us through a discussion on Juneteenth, the day of celebration of the so-called emancipation of Black people in the United States of America. So let me introduce her. She is the director of the Bay Area Entrepreneur Center at Skyline College, and she is the president and interim CEO of the Chamber of Commerce in San Bruno. She's used her more than 10 years of economic and workforce development experience to focus on serving and enhancing the opportunities of Black and Brown communities. She brings her upbringing in South Central LA and her lived experiences as a Black woman in these United States to bear on mentoring and cultivating the talents of young brothers and sisters throughout the Bay Area, areas Bayview, Hunters Point, Marin City, throughout San Mateo County, parts of San Leandro, throughout the East Bay. And she mentors them and works with them to go to college and to explore entrepreneurship as possibility. And in doing so, she founded the Student Business Pitch Competition at Skyline College and the mentoring, where she mentors learners in developing their own business ideas. And it has resulted in Black and Brown students launching their own businesses. And she's founded the Student Internship and Job Shadow Program that has the results of placing students in meaningful jobs. She's a co-chair of the Business Advisory Committee. It's comprised of business owners and strategic partners from around the Bay Area, and she's a member of the Kappa Beta Delta International Honor Society and has served on the Business and Finance Steering Committee for the San Leandro Business Academy, where she mentors high school students. A summa cum laude graduate of ASU's Organizational Leadership Program and a proud mother of an important young 3-year-old queen that you may hear in the background sometimes, little Miss Kabil Stroud. Please join me in welcoming our host and moderator, Miss Pcyeta Stroud. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stroud, for that introduction. Thank you so much. I sound so great. My goodness. It's amazing. Hello, everyone. I'm really proud and excited and honored really to lead this discussion in the concept of Juneteenth. I'm going to start quickly by introducing all of our panelists, our esteemed panelists. I'm not going in any particular order. This is just how it all happened. I'd like to introduce Royl Roberts. Royl Roberts is the Risk and Safety Manager for the Peralta Community College District. Royl holds degrees from the University of Texas at San Antonio, Our Lady of the Lake University and Golden Gate University School of Law. Royl currently serves on the board of the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center and is active in several community organizations. Royl was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and he has an interesting relationship with Juneteenth, I believe. Royl's grandparents are both from Texas, and his grandmother, as a young girl, picked cotton in the town of Sealy, which lies about 100 miles away from the site where Juneteenth was founded back in 1865. I'd like to introduce Brenda Johnson. Brenda Johnson is the Dean of Student Support Services at Berkeley City College. In her role as Dean, she provides leadership in the development, supervision, evaluation, and administration of several student support programs. Brenda also led the charge for student equity programs as Dean at the College of Alameda and Berkeley City College. Brenda is an Oakland native and a first-generation college graduate. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a Master's of Science in Rehabilitation Counseling from San Francisco State University. She also pursued doctoral studies with Alliant University at the California School of Professional Psychology and has extensive experience as a case manager and counselor serving our underrepresented and underserved populations. Brenda serves as chair of the Northern California American Council on Education Women's Network and is a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Allow me to introduce Dr. Siri Brown. Dr. Brown is the Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs and Student Success for the Peralta Community College District. Dr. Brown has been an educator for over 17 years, and as such, she also teaches African American Studies at the community college level. She is part-time faculty of Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley. She holds a Master's of Arts in African American Studies and a PhD in U.S. History from Ohio State University. Dr. Brown believes in expanding experiences for all students, especially our traditionally marginalized students of color. She and her colleagues developed an annual study abroad program that has taken hundreds of students to places like Jamaica, Ghana, Cuba, and other places in order to globalize their understanding of the world. Dr. Brown comes from a strong tradition of social justice. Her great-great-grandmother was a skilled midwife named Lula Glaspie Chatham, who traveled throughout Texas at the risk of her own life to bring new life, both Black and white, safely into this world. Dr. Brown is a proud mother of 2 gifted and brilliant sons who are currently college students at Hampton and Howard Universities. I'd like to introduce Jody Campbell. Jody Campbell is currently a professor in African Diaspora Studies at the College of Alameda and also teaches sociology at Solano Community College. Jody is a product of community college and has served his community as an educator for over 10 years in both faculty and coordinator roles and capacities. He holds a Bachelor's of African American Studies and Sociology from UC Davis and a Master's of Arts and Ethnic Studies from San Francisco State University. Jody has taught at almost every college in the Peralta Community College District, and that's a lot of colleges. Prior to teaching, Jody served 5 years as a social worker, where he actively worked with African American foster families throughout the East Bay. Jody has traveled and studied extensively throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, and when he's not teaching, he enjoys exploring these parts of the world with his family. I'd like to introduce Ramona Butler. Ramona currently serves as the EOPS Care Coordinator and Acting CalWorks Coordinator at Berkeley City College. In her role, she provides important student support services and tools for academic success to her college community. Ramona also serves as the staff advisor for the Black Student Union at Berkeley City College. She is the vice president of the Peralta Association of African American Affairs, also at Berkeley City College, and is co-chair for the Peralta Community College African American Graduation Committee. Ramona has attended every college in the Peralta district. As a returning student, she earned an associate's degree in liberal studies from Vista Community College, then went on to earn a bachelor's of arts in liberal studies from Cal State East Bay. Ramona has also completed the Peralta Leadership Succession Level class, and she's participated in the ACE Experimental Education Institute. I'd like to introduce Reverend Dr. Lawrence VanHook. Dr. Lawrence VanHook is a professor of history in the African American Studies discipline and teaches career development. He has taught at several colleges, including Merritt, Laney, and Patton University. Dr. Lawrence holds a bachelor's degree in liberal arts with emphasis in psychology, religion, and philosophy from Bishop College in Dallas, Texas. He holds a Master of Divinity degree from Sacramento Theology Seminary in Sacramento, California, and also has a Doctor of Ministry from United Theology Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. Dr. VanHook currently serves as the president of Peralta Association of African American Affairs. Through his community work, he has founded Millennium Ministries Group, a faith-based program based on holistic approaches to community building through physical, social, mental, and inspirational avenues. Dr. VanHook is a pastor and educator who leads by example with demonstrated commitment to the betterment of Oakland. I'd like to introduce, last but certainly not least, Jason Seals. Jason currently serves as the chair of ethnic studies and as a tenured professor of African American Studies at Merritt College. Jason completed his Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology at San Jose State University and earned his Master's of Education in Counseling Psychology from the University of San Francisco. Jason is a proud Oakland native and has served his community locally, nationally, and globally as an educator, thought leader, speaker, and change agent for over 20 years. As an African-centered educator, Jason carries the tradition of activist intellectual to address critical systemic issues and empower individuals for personal and social transformation. Beyond the classroom, Jason facilitates trainings on racial healing, anti-racism, parenting, fatherhood, and systems of change. Jason has a podcast called A Moment of Truth, which features authors, leaders, activists, and artists of African descent. Jason is most proud of his role as a father. His love for his own children is reflected in the work he does to rebuild families and communities as a means towards healing and wellness. Welcome to all of the panelists. Thank you all for being with us today. So we're going to get into the discussion. Especially in the last couple of weeks, it's all over the news. Now it seems to be all the rage. I heard the question, what is Juneteenth? A lot. And I mostly have a response, but I thought it was interesting that I'm getting this question a lot because I believe that Juneteenth is a very unrecognized and under-celebrated, if that's the term, day of historic significance. I think it's a day that many still don't know about, have never heard about. Many of us learned, we had a discussion earlier about the 4th of July, and we all know that it exists. We've all been to barbecues for the 4th of July. We've done fireworks for the 4th of July. I certainly have. But I cannot recall as a child learning about Juneteenth, no less having any sort of celebration or gathering as a result in its recognition. I didn't learn about Juneteenth until about 15 years ago. I accidentally attended a celebration of a festival in the park, and it was a Juneteenth festival. So that was my first real memory of knowing about Juneteenth. And I think that's a little ridiculous, mostly because I grew up in what I would consider the most blackety-black household you could think of. We did all the Black things. We ate bean pies. We learned about Sojourner Truth and Garrett Morgan and all the things he invented, and we celebrated Kwanzaa. But I do not recall learning about Juneteenth until decades later. So what I'd like to start this discussion with is your earliest memory of learning about Juneteenth. And so this may or may not be a point of vulnerability for some of us. It certainly was for me in sharing that story. If this memory was a couple of years ago, that's okay. If it was 30 years ago, I want to hear about it. So please share your earliest memory. And so I'm going to quickly go down the list so it's easy. I'm going to just call on you so you know it's your turn. And please share your earliest memory. And you only get 2 minutes. So this is a concise story. Thank you. Royal, you are first. Please share.
Well, thank you. I have a couple of distinct memories. One, you kind of touched on when in the introduction, when I was sitting down with my grandmother, either playing bid whist or dominoes, and she told me that she picked cotton. And I said, what? You couldn't have been a slave. And she's like, no, I didn't say I was a slave. I said I picked cotton. And she went ahead and told me about Juneteenth. And basically, it helped me realize the proximity in time, that it wasn't that far away, and that even after the Emancipation Proclamation, there were still the same industries. But also, I had a lot of family members who were cowboys, Black cowboys, which do exist, and especially in Texas. And I remember my uncles and great uncles training horses and getting ready to march in a Juneteenth parade. And this was in the early 90s, about 25 years ago. So I would say that was my first recollection. But again, that was in Texas. Thank you.
Thank you, Royal. Brenda.
I was a teenager living in East Oakland, right down the street from Arroyo Viejo Park. In Oakland, and I remember around Juneteenth, there would be a festival in the park, and from where our house sat, we could see the people coming and going, so I could see them dressed up, very in a festive garb. So that's my earliest memory, and I have to also say that I consider myself lucky to have had a father who taught me a great deal about African American history and just being a descendant of African slaves. And I have many of his old books, including one called The Black Scholar. I have his whole series of Black Scholars and Negro Digest books. And I went through those books just to see, is there anything on Juneteenth in particular that I could find? And I couldn't find anything. I found a lot of information about the upliftment of African people, African American people, but nothing specific to that particular holiday, which is supported and under-celebrated.
Very interesting, and part of the reason why we're having this discussion. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Brown, please share.
Thank you. I first learned about Juneteenth when I was in my mama's womb. And I tell you that because my family is from Texas, the father's side of my family. And Juneteenth is literally the most serious holiday in our family, next to Mother's Day. My great-grandmother and great-grandfather migrated with my grandparents' generation from Texas to San Jose, ultimately to San Jose. And they actually brought and established Juneteenth in San Jose. There's still a very large celebration of Juneteenth in San Jose. And I'm proud to be part of that history, to have my family be part of that history. So the earliest memories are family celebrations, coming together with community, organizing and helping organizing the events at a very young age, all the way through to today. And, you know, it's such a critical holiday because it's more than just simply acknowledging that that slavery ended in Texas at that time and the whole political dynamics around it. What it taught me was that we should really re-examine American holidays, quote unquote, you know, US holidays. And my family was very much into that. So we did not celebrate the 4th of July. I have great aunts and uncles who still to this day refuse to wear red, white, and blue. And so Juneteenth was not just about the history, it was about the juxtaposition of celebrating the independence of the United States when we were still held as enslaved people, and instead celebrating the end of slavery in that area of Texas.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. This is going to be a really good discussion, I can tell. Next, Reverend Doctor, please share your earliest Juneteenth memory.
Thank you so very much, and thank you all for allowing us to share. It's been at least a couple of decades due to my community activist work. In '68, if memory serves me correctly, we ended up leaving California, moving to Texas. My mother was the baby girl of 13, and I don't know how they voted. I'm still trying to figure out how did she be the one to move her family from California back to Texas to raise our grandparents. But that's when I began to hear of Juneteenth. It took me to get back to California and do the community work for me to really understand what they were talking about in East Texas. And then I began to put the connections together, even when I was there when we celebrated the integration of whites and blacks going to school together in '68. So it became a real motivating, thriving experience because I experienced it in East Texas and then brought it back to California to make it become alive. And so now it is a major opportunity for us to think about delayed freedom as we celebrate ourselves for the resilience as we move forward. So that's my earliest experience of Juneteenth.
Delayed freedom. Okay. Thank you, Reverend Doctor. Wow. Jody, please share your earliest Juneteenth memory.
Thank you all for being here. Chancellor, thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Fellow dignitary, it's a pleasure to be here sharing this morning. For me, I was very much like our facilitator, Sister Stroud, who didn't find out about Juneteenth until college. And it's ironic because 3 out of my 4 grandparents are actually from Texas. And Brother Roberts, is a very good chance we are kinfolk because my grandfather's family who moved out here to California in the second wave of the Great Migration during the World War II era came from Sealy, Texas, and also were sharecroppers of cotton primarily in that region of Texas. One of the things that I would like to share, however, is in my awakening through college, Laney College more specifically, in the African American Studies department, there is when I first knew about what this Juneteenth celebration truly represented. So as Black people in this country, we have a lot of unlearning and a lot of relearning to do. And I love how we sort of position Abraham Lincoln's 1863 Emancipation Proclamation is not the true Emancipation Day. And Abraham Lincoln, contrary to popular belief, did not free the slaves because we know for a fact that he did not free Nat Turner. We know for a fact that he did not free Harriet Tubman. We liberated ourselves, and liberation is never granted. It is always fought for. And that is the true story of the African presence in this nation. So it is with me with very humble sentiments to share with you all I was kept in the dark. And as we know how information is disseminated in this country, it is done that way intentionally. So this session, I hope, will allow us to further expand that knowledge of what true emancipation is, when it came, and how it came. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jody. I had to write some notes down on that. My goodness. Ramona, please share your earliest memory.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here with all of you. I respect and love you all for all of your greatness and all of your ability to teach our students and teach us as faculty, as staff, and just everything. So my earliest memories of Juneteenth came as a blurb in an elementary school class, which was not very much. And I remember asking my parents about Juneteenth, and of course they were people in the 50s. My mom worked for the federal government. My dad was a printer at Pcyeta. And so I didn't have a lot of information about Juneteenth. I did live in Oakland as well, and I saw, they had little celebrations at a Royal VAO park, and sometimes we were able to go, and other times, it was just, I was young, so I didn't get a chance to do a lot. And I didn't really understand the significance of it until, I was a returning student, and I started getting really immersed in education and really passionate about education. And so then I started to do some research, started to find some information about Juneteenth. So that was my experience, or lack thereof, of understanding and knowing about Juneteenth.
Thank you, Ramona. Thank you. We all have our own interesting stories here. Jason, please share your earliest memory.
Good morning. I would like to acknowledge my father, Thomas Sills, my mother, Cheryl Sills. Just thankful to be here. For me, my earliest memory, I can't actually pinpoint it, because my mother, earliest memories in terms of being introduced to a lot of culture was attending rallies of the Panthers with my grandfather, Abdul Rahman. And so my mother continued that legacy. And so I started going to Juneteenth celebrations as a child. And so to pinpoint, I can't really remember because it was so normalized. But I do think initially it was just, a ritual that we engaged in. And I think over time, I learned more and more as I went through my life, my journey, understanding who I was. But it was just so normalized that I can't really remember when I didn't go. But I do remember always going to the Juneteenth celebration in Berkeley. And that's been going on, I believe, now for 33 years. And so it's been some time. And I just think that it's always been a part of my family legacy to be involved in activism and cultural knowledge.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you all for sharing and kicking off this panel in response to that question. It actually means a lot to me to just hear from everyone where we have some similarities, and then also where I definitely have some learning to do myself. So thank you. So our first question is for Jody. So Jody, you had mentioned something that really resonated with me, that liberation is not given to us, it's something we have to fight for. And so my question really is about Juneteenth being recognized in almost all 50 states in these United States, almost. Should it be a federal holiday? Should it have federal recognition? Is that something we need to fight for? Is it being given to us? I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Thank you, Sister Stroud. I feel we should fight for it the same way we have had to fight for literally everything, including our existence in this society. So I think this is something that we need to force the federal government to acknowledge. And what that acknowledgement is the contributions, accomplishments, and achievements of African people in this nation from start to finish, wherever that finish may end. but we were definitely part of the very genesis of this society. So why is it that we know more about Abraham Lincoln and George Washington than we do Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth? So part of this conversation is expanding the knowledge, because as Frederick Douglass said, knowledge is truly power. And when we look at the knowledge of the fact that our emancipation did not come in 1863, but later in 1865 by way of constitutionality, we find that our story is very different. Later on, I would like to read a couple of excerpts from the great Frederick Douglass, who clearly asked, "What to the slave is the 4th of July? This celebration is more yours than it is mine." And he also called out the hypocrisy of this nation for having the audacity in 1776 to demand their liberation and freedom while leaving 4 million other people who also fought in revolutionary struggle, being the first to die in Crispus Attucks for the revolutionary cause, yet freedom was denied. So I think it is long overdue for this society, for this nation, to begin to federally acknowledge the achievements of African people in this nation. So my answer, Sister Stroud, is a vehement yes. We do need to have this as a federal holiday.
Tell us, Jody, from a global perspective, you've been lots of different places, especially throughout the diaspora, Latin America and the Caribbean. Why is it important in a global perspective to have that recognition? What does it mean to the world?
Thank you so much again. From a global point of view, the tremendous accomplishments and achievements of African people have always been hidden. And our job, as we all know, as scholars, as academics, as parents, is to uncover that which was hidden. And a significant part of that which was hidden is our contributions. And Dr. Naeem Akbar, the great psychologist, suggests that being aware of those contributions and celebrating ourselves in celebrations such as Juneteenth is a psychological healing of African people who have suffered so much throughout the diaspora. My great professor, Dr. John O. Stewart from UC Davis from Trinidad, took me for the first time in my life outside of this country. And one of the things that we sort of encountered in Trinidad was the fact that Black people catch hell everywhere. This isn't a local situation, this is a global situation. And I think pushing this agenda to the forefront is not only needed at the local level, it is also needed at the global level in terms of African recognition.
Thank you, Jody. Dr. Brown, I'd like to talk a little bit about your students. And when I say your students, I know you have launched study abroad programs so that students can explore the world. For our students, what would the level of recognition that Jody was just speaking about, what would that mean for our students here at home and as they travel throughout the world?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I'm no longer teaching in Peralta. I'm an administrator. I'm the vice chancellor in the district, and I've been out of the classroom in Peralta for 4 years now. But you know, what Jody shared is really important in many respects, in that that there is not a recognition of the history, the contributions, the cultural framework, you know, of the African presence here in this country and beyond. But I would really say that asking for this federal government to acknowledge our history in the form of a Juneteenth, you know, federal holiday, to me is really a much lower priority than it is for us to know our history and to hold on to our history and to shift our cultural framework away from just simply following, you know, the status quo of this paradigm, of this very Eurocentric, hegemonic nation, and instead honor Juneteenth, celebrate it, teach about it, and critically think about the other things that we do, the other holidays, the other practices that we do, and hopefully come to reject those With my children, I was really very conscious about this. We celebrated Nat Turner's Revolution. My kids today are like, Mom, you did too much. But I know that I laid the framework around, we did Kwanzaa. And it wasn't, again, like I said earlier, about just like we're doing these things because. It's because I wanted my children, like we want our students, to really think critically about their actions and about what you're participating in and what it means when you participate in something like Thanksgiving. When you come into a knowledge of history, then it forces you to critically think about how you move in this world. And that's what we need for our young people. Our African American Studies and Ethnic Studies programs in Peralta are, as most people know, historic, the first, laid down foundations in terms of curriculum and worldview that to this day influence how we think of ethnic studies and Black studies, Africana studies. And so I know that in our classrooms, the faculty who teach in these disciplines are doing just that, asking students to think deeply and to make critical shifts. If I were to ask the federal government for anything, it would be reparations. That is overdue, and we need that with interest, and it's just and right to do so. So that's really kind of the way that I think about it, that mental slavery and mental freedom is the critical piece, because if we don't know who we are, like Marcus Garvey said, a tree, people without knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. And if you think about what he's saying there, if you think about a tree that doesn't have roots, and the roots is where you get your nutrients, the water, everything that the tree needs to flourish, it means that the tree will die. People without knowledge of their history are set to perish. And we can see in our own communities the ways that a lack of knowledge of really who we are as a people is a part of the complexities of the problems that we are continuing to have as a race.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you so much. That was extremely insightful, and absolutely, I wanted your perspective. I wanted everyone to have your perspective as a college administrator, as a vice chancellor. So thank you for that. I think it's important. I think a lot of times when you think of college and students, we are very focused on a classroom experience, and it is just so much broader than that. And so your perspective is absolutely important in that our administration, I also work at a community college, that the administrators get it, and that this is coming from every aspect of the college. So thank you for that perspective. My next question is for Royl. And this is really about, you mentioned reparations, Dr. Brown, absolutely. I want to quickly talk about the economics of Juneteenth. And Royl, as someone who works at the district office for Peralta Community College, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the private sector, because you are also an attorney. and when it comes to, we have a lot of businesses, I feel like a lot of major corporations are hopping on the Juneteenth train, and they're doing all sorts of things. And, because we are, we literally had to take to the streets, and now Juneteenth is this week. There are things that are happening that I think are kind of cool, but I am curious about some of the implications. So Target is now offering paid Juneteenth as a holiday. Google and Twitter, some of our major tech giants, they have Juneteenth as a paid holiday for their employees. And so I would like you to just shed some light on the private sector benefits. Is this benefiting them to have Juneteenth as a paid holiday? What does it mean on a broader sense?
Thank you. And again, if I didn't say it earlier, I want to thank the Chancellor for having these bold and courageous conversations and allowing a platform for this to even happen. As you mentioned before, a lot of this is about economics, and starting from the end of slavery to the prison industrial complex, and from slavery into prison pipeline to do the work. But there is the economic standpoint that is always there as a backdrop. In addition to that, as the chancellor also mentioned earlier, we are at a critical juncture. We are at a bubbling point. And what that has caused many to think about is what impact can we have and what impact can we make? And those who may not be able to get out in the streets are looking for ways to impact the pockets of those corporations that support systematically racist organizations or corporations or companies. So it does make sense that many are looking at Juneteenth to make a national holiday or do certain things. But I think ultimately it's around how do we make an impact as a people and bind together to really show our power and show our contributions to society and especially to America. So I do think that there is room to put pressure on corporations, on all institutions, to really show that we are marching in solidarity. And I couldn't agree more with what Dr. Brown said around, this is a low bar to set, but we really need to have these conversations around reparations, around the multitudes of dollars that have been made on the backs of Black people over so many generations. So I will continue to fight this fight in solidarity, but I do believe that it's going to be something that has to be a concentrated effort by individuals. And I think that what's really driving this forward is because now we are to the point where we cannot accept this anymore. So thank you for the question, and thank you for being a part of the panel.
Thank you so much, Royal, Mr. Roberts. Thank you for that. You cannot have the discussion without talking about economics. Absolutely. Thank you for your insight. I am going to ask a similar question of you, Professor Seals. I'd love to hear your take on this and some of the implications you see. And you can speak to some of the general broader concepts of how closely linked this is to economics. And even in particular, just the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, just this morning or yesterday, Quaker Company is removing the image of Aunt Jemima, right? And so it is all about economics, and I'd love to hear your take on that, Professor Seals.
Give thanks. This is a complex because I think for me, what resonates most is that Juneteenth for me has been like reclaiming our cultural knowledge and growing our community. And I think there's so many of our young people that would benefit a great deal learning about Juneteenth. And as they learn about Juneteenth, it could be, somewhat a pathway or a gateway to learning more about our history and our culture that I think builds race esteem. And I think when we have race esteem, we begin to show up differently, we begin to organize in our communities, and we begin to have a healthier quality of life. But I think economically, I think there's a lot of exploitation happening right now. I think there's a lot of companies that are trying to save their bottom line. And so everybody's putting out statements. Everyone's, it's a good time right now. If you're a Black person and you want to get hired at a, certain tech company, all you gotta do is put, emphasize some type of way that you're a person of African ancestry in your cover letter, and you'll get hired. And so I do think we can leverage those things if we so choose to, but I also think the bar is so low. And I feel like, for me, intrinsically, this is important. And when it's a value set, it's always a part of your orientation. For a lot of white people, it's at the forefront of their mind. But if it's not a value set, once the dust settles, they'll be on to something else. So for me, anything that they give to us right now, or anything that we have fought for right now, really is just, to Dr. Brown's point, it's like they're not even addressing the interests right now. It's just, what is happening right now to me is more of it's more of a response to address the fears of what could potentially happen. And so economically, I think that we have to galvanize ourselves to be clear on what we want as a community. Because I think that fighting for Juneteenth as a federal holiday, I mean, to me, I think it's more important that we know that it's a holiday for us in our community. But I also think Juneteenth is about also assessing how far we've come in terms of freedom. And I think we need to be mindful that until we have economic freedom, meaning that we have our own economic institutions, then I'm not sure how good it does us to get handouts, so to speak, from these companies. I think we should be at the forefront, meaning that we need to have our own banks, we need to have our own schools, we need to have our own organizations that can supply for us what we need economically. And that's where we should be really focused our attention. I think a federal holiday, you know, I'm not sure how far that takes us in terms of our liberation.
Thank you so much, Professor Seals, for that perspective. This is such a rich discussion, and there are so many priorities here. I think it can be a bit challenging to pinpoint what's number one. So I think this is such an important conversation for us to have. I would like to hear from you, Ms. Johnson, your perspective from an equity lens and some historical perspective on where we're at in this discussion right now. Right now, we have kind of shifted from this concept, this holiday, what it meant, the economic importance of ownership, right? And I would love to hear from you, your perspective on that from an equity lens. And maybe even we've shifted from this being an established holiday, but I would love to hear what you think about that.
Well, I just want to begin by, if I didn't already say so, to thank our Chancellor for bringing us together. This is the first time in all the years that I've been at Peralta, which have been many, that I've seen something like this happen. Not to say that we haven't tried to do things collectively throughout the district, but on a topic so important as Juneteenth that has been so shoved aside that to me, this is a tremendous, tremendous step that we're taking. It's historical in and of itself that this is happening, and that there are key players that are at the table right now. So I wanted to begin by saying that, and also from an equity lens, we're so used to putting ourselves aside and so used to not being willing to speak up for what is right and what is justice for us. It always gets diluted in the conversation about, well, what about everybody else? The whole Black Lives Matter. I heard someone say, well, we should say Black Lives Matter too, to step away from the conversations about, well, it matters for all. We're saying it matters for us, and it is critical right now. Raising an African-American son, he's 34 right now, but I still think of him as my young son, but he's 34, is a challenge. Even though he grew up in a household where he was loved, supported, shown education, he still struggles. Thank goodness he's not in the streets. He's not at that point, but he still struggles. And until we're able to recognize what's important to us. I mean, how many districts, for example, celebrate Malcolm X's birthday? Peralta does. It's a holiday for us. It's a holiday. And that speaks volumes. I remember when Merritt was down on Grove Street growing up. And so in terms of from an equity lens, I think it's time for us to stop saying, well, what about everybody else, and really focus on, well, what about this group who have been cast aside, shut aside, and really still being treated as a non-human being, someone whose life is just disposable. And I think that it's time for us to continue conversations like this. I'm so grateful to have been a part of this discussion. And I, again, want to thank our Chancellor and thank all of you for hearing you out, hearing your perspectives. So that's my response.
Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson. Thank you. Black people are people too. That is my new favorite phrase. I would like to ask, I'm going to move slightly away from my questions and pull back a little bit. We shared a really quick snippet on what is Juneteenth. This is a video that circulates all over the internet, millions of views. This is the information that is out there. I would really like to ask, I'm going to shift it back to Professor Campbell. Tell us really quickly, in light of that video, what is Juneteenth?
Thank you so much, Sister Stroud. Juneteenth is historically a particular date in which true emancipation, meaning you could no longer hold African people in chains as chattel any longer. So that was clearly a day to celebrate. So Juneteenth is a time to celebrate that version of freedom. And I say version of freedom because when I think of freedom, I think of agency, having the ability to think and to act based on choices. We have to remember that after 1865, even in that period of emancipation, we still had Jim Crow. We still had a failure called Reconstruction that was sort of mishandled, if you will, by Abraham Lincoln's Vice President, Andrew Johnson, which took back all the few gains that African people had acquired in that short period of time. And as Jason said, it was back to business as usual. So Juneteenth is a couple of things. It has historical significance in terms of constitutionality, but it also has the celebratory aspect of it as well, that African people in this country have always, as my grandmother said from Mississippi, a sharecropper, she said, Black people have always had to make lemonade out of these sour lemons. And that is sort of what Juneteenth represents from my point of view, in terms of constitutionality on one hand or legality on one hand, but celebratory meaning on the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Campbell. Thank you so much for that explanation. I think that's very necessary. It was very necessary. I would like to ask my next question to Ms. Butler. Ms. Butler, from serving students on a daily basis, from your perspective, what does this mean to students as they navigate and access services through this educational system, as you work with them to figure it out? What does Juneteenth have to do with students as you work with them?
Thank you for that question. Working with students, Juneteenth, well, let me just say, for me, Juneteenth it's an opportunity for us to change the narrative about how this country and how we see ourselves. And so working with students every day, having them having knowledge of Juneteenth would allow them to seek out their services as it is their right to do, not just to accept what people think they should have, but for them to know what they need and move forward with that in a powerful way. Not be disrespected, not be talked to any kind of way, not be cast, aside, oh, we'll get to it. And that's kind of what I see working with students every day and how they are treated in certain aspects of things, whether it's financial aid or whether it's just getting their books or even knowing how to navigate a system. So I don't want to put the blame on everyone, but I think that for us to change the narrative to empower ourselves will allow us to walk differently through the world. It will allow us to walk differently as far as we seek our education. It would allow us to think critically. And I say us because I'm also a student. So that's what I think about services for students and how students can seek services. It's their right to have it. It's their right to seek a meaningful education. It's their right. And so knowing about Juneteenth, knowing about the history of Juneteenth, knowing how Juneteenth affects us is, as far as our history here, would empower our students to move forward, Black students. And also, just because we are for Black people does not mean that we're against anyone else. And so that changing that narrative is very important, and our students benefit from that. And we also have the spiritual authority. You know, we have the spiritual authority to teach our students about Juneteenth, about themselves, about their history, and it elevates them, it elevates our ancestors, it elevates us as a people.
Thank you so much, Ms. Butler, for that, just adding such richness to this conversation. Thank you for that perspective. Reverend Dr. VanHook, this question is for you. How is what's happening right now in our world today, in this nation today, and throughout the world, how is it shaped and informed by the knowledge of Juneteenth?
Well, thank you so very much. And again, I want to acknowledge the sentiments of everyone else. This is a phenomenal opportunity, Dr. Stroud. Thank you so very much. I called one of my mentors for this very occasion. Dr. Wade Nobles is sheltering in place in Texas at the present time. And I wanted to get his avenues of extraction about this climate and time. And so he basically shared with me a couple of things that I wanted to lift. I got so many things I want to say about this, but I thought Dr. Noble's response was so very healthy. First of all, he said that this opportunity, Juneteenth, is again another opportunity for us to talk about delayed freedom. It just couldn't be it couldn't be in 1863. It had to come down the road. For us to grapple with, I think that Dr. Nobles was real clear by saying, this is really white supremacy at its best. And he said, I want you to tell the world that white supremacy is actually a mental illness. And we need to take a look and diagnose that mental illness so that we can begin to move the country and the world and the nation forward. But he basically said, this is really about the basis of humanity. Because I am a faith leader, I think that that's what couches my conversation more than anything else. I think that my liberation comes from my tradition of spirituality. In my book, I talk about the three prongs that life sits on. Number one is your spirituality, your value system. Number two, your political system, which is your decision-making process. And then number three, your economics, which is your barter and trade. How do you frame the world? And education literally provides the information to these three prongs. And from a spiritual perspective, this is not my first time reading about living in the moment of Juneteenth. From a historical perspective in spirituality, we know this story from the story that plays every year, Cecil B. DeMille's version of 10 Commandments, where there was a group of people that was couched in slavery for 400 years. And even though They were denied their freedom. Freedom delayed is never freedom denied. And so to me, this is an opportunity, even though there is some skewedness in those biblical narratives, it still rings today that we must continue to struggle. We must continue to fight to liberate ourselves. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to double down on ethnic studies, on African-American history, to make sure that more and more people are getting the message how we can describe and hold on to the narratives. In spirituality, you can't imagine, but the Mormons have an annual major event about their history and their journey in this country. The 4th of July is a major event where the people in this country talk about the history and what gives them essence. And we have to quit looking for other people, but to clearly describe the resilience and the resilience that we have as a people. And definitely, I agree with Dr. Brown. We need to start having a conversation around reparations. I wasn't a big fan of reparations, but now I'm definitely more and more inclined to begin to look at how do we become whole in this country. I was just on a call with Peralta African American Association and Affairs, what we call the Western Regional. And there is a bill coming out in the state of California now where we're talking about reparations from one of our politicians in Southern California that we need to become aware of. And it really talks about making us whole as a people, and the institution is the bedrock. Education is the foundation of everything that we must do, and we have to get our information out correctly so that we can build an excellent foundation as we move forward.
Thank you, Reverend Doctor. Thank you so much for that profound insight and a wonderful close to this discussion. So we've got time for one final thought, and I would again love to hear from everyone a final thought. And this can be in the form of some advice that you would like for the young members of our community to have, or one takeaway. What do you want people to know? So again, I'm going to go down my list. Mr. Roberts, please share. What do you want people to walk away with after seeing this panel?
Thank you. One thing I would like for all the young people, especially young Black people, is to realize that although we're talking about slavery, the end of slavery, just to remember that prior to slavery in Africa, Blacks were proficient in medicine, mathematics, geometry, astronomy, astrology, and that even though we're taught to start there, we started well before that. So remember that and incorporate that into your soul, into your knowledge and your learning. And thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Ms. Johnson, final thought, please.
Well, I would want to encourage our young people to do that, to start their journey in learning about who they are as a people. I think when we are able to do that, when we're able to understand who we were even before coming here, as Royl said, to this country, that is when the third eye opens and the want for more knowledge and the betterment of your community, that's when it all comes together. So I just hope that our students and also our fellow Peralta family members also take heed as well. We should be able to walk tall, hold our head up high, and be the great people that we were meant to be, and not let anything stop us.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Dr. Brown, final thought, please.
My final thoughts are that our African-American students should know that they are brilliant, gifted, talented, intelligent, capable, and that we are here to serve their trajectory. I I want our students to know that taking an African American Studies class, whether it's in your SEP or not, is critical, because to move forward without knowing really who you are will stunt that trajectory. And when you find out so much about who we are as African people, past, present, and moving into the future, it will propel you to heights beyond what you even imagined. And so that's my final words.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Professor Campbell, a final thought, please.
So I just want to thank the young people, thank the youth for this powerful movement that has been reinvigorated in our streets. Remember, there's a quote that suggests that there can be no liberation without struggle. And the first documented liberation movement in this Western Hemisphere fought by African people occurred in 1526, when the Spanish attempted to enslave African people in a place called San Miguel de Guadalupe, which is now modern day Georgia. And that struggle started with enslaved Africans burning down the hut of someone who had the audacity to enslave them and take their freedom from them. So we're seeing those activities transcend to this generation right now. And one of the things that we're talking about today with Juneteenth is to honor, to recognize, to celebrate. And one of the things I want to tell the young people is that for us, Black lives do matter. And Black lives matter because of the fact that we have had to fight, we have had to die, we have had to struggle for this price we call freedom that Dr. King said should have been given to us at birth. So Black lives matter, and the federal, in my opinion, the federal recognition is long overdue. Anything folks put on the table for Black people is long overdue. I want it all. And if that includes the acknowledgement of a federal holiday to show young people that are now yet again struggling for freedom, that Black lives do matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Campbell, for that final thought. Ms. Butler, a final thought, takeaway.
My final thought is, I would like to say to our young people to take this momentum and move past, the anger and the atrocity and the terror that we have all witnessed, and move past this and learn about your history. Don't wait till we're angry to want to learn about our history. Learn about your history. Read it for yourself. Read it for yourself. Don't necessarily let someone else tell you who you are. Learn about it for yourself. And think critically. Have discussions. Education is a tool. Education is the tool to unlocking the information that you need to move forward. Enslavement is only a part of our history. We are great, and you are great. Take this, move forward. Let us help you to move forward and change the world.
Thank you, Ms. Butler, for that. Professor Seals, a final thought, please.
I would tell our young people, staff, faculty, administrators, I think we need to dream and manifest. Our ancestors didn't dream of this idea of a better form of slavery. They actually thought of liberation and freedom. And so for me, I think it's really important for us to dream and manifest. Dream and manifest beyond just this moment. We need to define what freedom is, socially, politically, economically, spiritually. We need to understand the importance of that. When we dream and manifest in those areas, that will be the centerpiece for our healing and liberation as a people. And so I would tell people, dream and manifest. I give an assignment in my class every semester, draw a picture of freedom. And the reason why I give that is because it's really important that sometimes these concepts are so abstract. I need you to get clear on what that is so you can know what you're fighting for, so you can know what you're living for. So then not once you see what that is, you know where your efforts are at. So I would give that to our students.
Gotta know what you're fighting for. Thank you so much, Professor Seals, for that final thought. Reverend Doctor, final thought, please.
Thank you so very much. I would like to say to not only our students, but just the people abroad, that education and information, the right information, is the most important thing. But I wanted to leave us with a comment from one of our historians, the late great Dr. Benjamin Mays. And he basically says it like this: it must be born in the minds that the tragedy of life does not lie in not reaching your goals, but the tragedy of life lies in not having any goals to reach. And it's so very important that we take on this opportunity to have some clear set goals and objectives in our lives, and then, as Dr. Seals said, Brother Seals said, manifest them, and not just talk about and dream about them, but making sure that we reach the ultimate goal of freedom for our human race.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. VanHook, for that final thought. For the final thought, Dr. Stanback Stroud is going to close out the panel and give us all, share a takeaway, a final thought for the audience.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, this has been extremely informative, educational, but also uplifting. And my thoughts are not necessarily for the students. I want to direct my thoughts to all of us here on this panel. One of the things that I spend my life work doing is trying to make sure that I use my position of influence and consequence to make a difference, to make it mattered that I even occupied whatever position that was, whether it was when I was a faculty member, when I was the State Academic Senate President, when I was a Dean of Workforce and Economic Development working on anti-poverty strategies, or the Vice President of Instruction, or a President of a college, and now the Chancellor, that I don't waste this space that I'm occupying, and that I use it in order to influence things and the mobilization of resources, and to influence the enfranchisement and the elimination of the kind of habits of exclusion and marginalization and oppression, and particularly of people of color or students of color. And so I want to remind all of us to take the opportunity to do that in this celebration of the so-called emancipation of we as a people. Use your positions as you are making decisions and influencing things that are taking place in curriculum, for an example, in the development and establishments of programs, or whether programs continue to exist, in the hiring processes where you serve on screening committees and it makes a difference as to who goes forward to ultimately get to the end of having the possibility of being brought in as a faculty member or a staff member or an administrator. In the allocation of resources, as we all sit on different committees and talk about what money should be going where, and what budget should be cut, and what budget should not be cut, and what money should be allocated, and what grants should be given, etc. In the entire maintenance of the culture of our district, and as you look at what our district stands for and what type of culture we as a people have to be a part of in this district in order to do our work. We all have the ability to influence that. In what professional development takes place, in different types of policies, practices, procedures that take place that have a direct impact on not only the lives of students and the lives of the community, but actually the lived and lived experiences of the people that work within our district and in our colleges as well. We are at a precise moment, and it's not necessarily that I'm not disillusioned or naive enough to think that all of a sudden the whole world has become woke. I think all of you have made comments that say, look, let's take advantage of the momentum, but let's keep it clear and let's keep it accurate. I know Professor Derek Bell says that, has introduced a convergence theory that said it's not until the interest of Black people achieving racial equality will not happen until it converges with the interest of whites. And I think that what has happened when you see this convergence of interest, and it's a lot of different types of interest, whether you're talking about interest in terms of appealing to people's humanity and whether somebody can watch what's going on in terms of the way Black people are treated, or whether you're talking about economic interest, where all of a sudden all of these companies are woke and are, are looking at the economic bottom line of anti-discrimination or anti-racism, or just simply eliminating, an image, an icon of an image in Quaker Oaks or Uncle Ben's or whatever it might be. But those are convergence of interest. And so when I look at what we have the possibility of doing as members of the faculty, as members of the staff, as members of the administration throughout the colleges and throughout the districts, when I look at the kind of power, which is the ability to influence, we have a tremendous amount of power to harness and to use in a very constructive way that supports the advancement of our community of Black and Brown people particularly. I want to acknowledge somebody said something about, remember that you are brilliant, you're gifted, you're talented, you're intelligent, and you're capable. I want to put all of those together and acknowledge all of that and the sheer majesty of what's represented on this panel. And I'm so honored and proud to be a part of this district that has this kind of representation. And then I'd like to close with thanking Ms. Stroud. Ms. Stroud is volunteered. She was voluntold to do this for us, and she really stepped up to it, did a lot of work to think through, and was really concerned with making sure she gave us precisely what we were hoping to get out of this process. And I want to say, Pcyeta, not only to the panel, job well done, but Pcyeta Stroud, job well done. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Stanback Stroud. I really appreciate, and I'm honored to have been invited to join all of you. I am truly a little starstruck. I'm in awe to be on a panel with all of you wonderful, amazing, intelligent, and accomplished people. So thank you so much for inviting me, for having me, and for allowing me to be a part of this conversation with you. And with that is the conclusion of our program. To all of you viewing on YouTube, happy Juneteenth.